And there we go. Good evening, good afternoon, and good morning. First of all, thank you very much for spending time with us today. I'm Jill Greenback, one of the Drawifiers, and our mission is to make communication and collaboration more impactful using drawings. And that's why we developed Drawify. Although we believe that everyone is able to draw, we've seen in our careers as visual storytellers that not everyone feels confident enough. So we created a platform where you can create visual stories, templates, and more without having to draw yourself. Behind the platform, there's a bunch of amazing, talented visual storytellers that feed the platform with drawings and templates for you to use. Besides that, we want to inspire you, make you even smarter in visual storytelling, because above all, we want you to shine. That's why we organize our monthly sessions like this one, where we share tips, tricks, and knowledge. And today we have the pleasure and honor to invite Andi Roberts as our guest speaker. And he will be speaking with us about design thinking in a nutshell. And Andi will also introduce himself because he knows himself best. I hand it over to you, Andi.
Great, thank you. Fantastic. Thanks, Jill. And hello, everybody, wherever you are on the planet. Great to have you here. So I've been involved as a Drawifier from the beginning of the project. My work, the day job as such, is as a professional facilitator and coach and part-time executive educator. The topic today around design thinking in a nutshell has interested me for literally decades. I came across design thinking as a methodology in 1999 before it became as well known as it's doing now in 2023. And so what I'd like to do today is to share thoughts, perspectives, some ideas around this. We're going to squeeze into less than 60 minutes what would typically be a couple of days. So we're going to be fairly ferocious in the content, but I'm going to be pausing. I'm going to be asking you questions. So please do ask away. And what I would ask, if you've got a question, please throw it into the chat box. If you put a couple of question marks at the front, then Jill and myself can see that that's there. And I'll come back to those in the pauses. I'll also be sharing, as well as the recording that we have from today, the slides that I'm using. So if you want to come back and review them, you can certainly do that. And I'll also be sharing a link to a resource that I've put together around design thinking, which has got recommended books, websites, communities, videos, and so on as well. So welcome to Design Thinking in a nutshell. Purposely, from a design perspective, we've stayed away from Miro and Mural and all of the great whiteboards today, and we're also going to stay away from the Drawify platform, but I will be talking at the back end of the session about how you can connect design thinking with Drawify. So with that, let me get going. A couple of slides to get going, and then I'm going to be asking you questions and getting you to interact also into the chat box as well. So design thinking. And I guess before we even go into the thinking piece, what is design? And this is my question for you, really. I want to just spend a few moments thinking about some principles of good design. As you see me go through the slide deck, you'll see on most of the slides, visuals, they're from the Drawify platform. So you can spot in the bottom right-hand corner who has drawn what. And Jill, you are included as well as part of the slide deck today as well. So everybody, I think I've tried to get as many as I can from the Drawify team in the platform. So let's talk a bit about design before we get into design thinking. And I'd just be curious, just to get your fingers all warmed up and get you engaged, what are some great designs that you think of when you think of design? Never mind the thinking, but what are some great designs? And I put a couple of examples up here of absolute hideous design on the slide. I'm not sure I want to use that toilet ever or that lift. It's mightily confusing, but I'm just curious, throw into the chat box, what are some great designs that you like? Could be products or services. We tend to think about products, tangible things, but services are also designed. Whether that's a health service, a bus service, a transport service, everything around us is designed, whether we think it is or not, from a simple Bic biro pen through to obviously big buildings and so on. So what's a design that you think is great? So what is it and why is it? Jill, the Guggenheim, fantastic, yeah, amazing design. And interestingly, design is in the eye of the beholder, right? Whether we like it or not. So be curious. Simplistic things that are easy to grasp Definitely there's a move, Kavita, towards simplicity in design, most definitely. So keep on putting your ideas up here. I mean, certainly for me, the bank machine, the ATM, Jeanette, yeah, what an amazing thing. Particularly if you've got money in your bank account, that really helps. The bank machine design worked really, really well. So that's great to see. But yeah, the bank machine. And it's interesting, they've got a lot better over the years. Kerry says the Neuland marker. The Neuland marker is fantastic. For those that don't know, it's a marker pen that you can change the nib, you can refill it, and so it's basically available for the rest of your life. But I'm still using pens that are pre the current designs. They must be now like 25 years old and they're still working because I'm able to refill them. Yep, Lego brick, fantastic as a topic there. Face ID, yeah, again, services, right? Digital services, tangible services, physical services, and products as well. And so as I think about design thinking should also say the same thing. Thank you, Jeanette. And if you've got feedback, we're always up for feedback on the platform, really. If you've got any, let us know. I know Axel and the team behind it are always really open for feedback. So I just wanted to share one person who kind of inspires me in my work as a designer. I'm really a facilitator of design sessions. I don't do the design, although I'm midway through a degree in design and innovation focused on sustainability, but I've been running facilitation of design sessions for decades now, since literally 2004, I think was my first design thinking facilitated session. And Dieter Rams is a great example for me because he just creates such simple designs. And if you look in the bottom right hand corner here, you can see this very simple radio coming from Brown and how the impact that it's actually had on Johnny Ive, who was the head of design at Apple, who's now moved on to run his own design agency. And just as I think about this idea of design and design thinking, it's all about simplicity. We've tended often to overcomplicate what we do and how we do it. So all design should be simple, easy to use. In my world, I call this frictionless. Make what you do frictionless, whether it's a product or a service, whether it's internal within a business or out to a community, or whatever it might be. I mean, design thinking, you can design thinking your family holiday. And I'll talk about that as an example as we go through the session. But good design should be simple, easy to use, and effortless to understand how to use the product or the service. But the focus today is the process for getting to good design. That's the design thinking, away from the pure design itself. I'm using as the guide for the session one of the templates within Drawify. So Axel's put together this very simple design thinking structure, which is based on the Stanford Business School, Design School way of looking at design thinking. There are multiple flavors of design, but they all fundamentally come back to the same thing. The first thing is design is not a linear process, it's iterative. And in fact, the best design process I've been involved in go backwards and forwards. So we think we've found the solution, we go and share it with the customer or colleague or employee, and they go, that's hideous. And we go, why is it hideous? Tell us why. Okay, back to the drawing board. And so you loop around the whole process continuously. It's not about finding the perfect solution the first time. One of my favorite team activities is the marshmallow challenge. You might have come across this, where you have a marshmallow and 20 pieces of spaghetti. And there's a great video about it from a Doe gentleman, Tom Wujek. And he says, business school people and senior leaders, they try and come up with the perfect solution and it always fails. And so this is the challenge, I think, with design and design thinking. We need to have it experimentation, trying it out, iterating it. And it's really focusing on who needs the solution, the service, the product. And ideally, you want to be doing it with other people. More minds is always better. And it doesn't have to be about product. It can be about services. And I think sometimes it's an in-between thing as well. Yeah, kids absolutely do it better. And that's one of the things from the Tom Wujek. They're willing to experiment. They're willing to take risks. They're willing to try. They're not just to save their backsides all of the time. That's why kids are so successful when they are trying to design things, most definitely. So in my mind, design thinking is just basically structured problem solving. Critical to it is working with the people who are going to be using the product or service and then ideally collaborating with them to come up with the solution. And so we'll go through the phases here, but it's the critical thing is whilst I go through in a linear fashion, it's not linear whatsoever. It's very much an iterative process. It's a customer orientated or user orientated experience, and it involves multiple rounds of feedback. So let's have a look at empathize, the first phase here, the critical phase. Typically, if I think about my experience in corporate world before becoming a business owner and becoming a business coach and facilitator, the top of the organizational pyramid always thought they knew best. And I was quite surprised a few years ago to come across this TV series, Undercover Boss, where they go out of their high office in the corner and they go and see the real workers on the street or doing the core work with their customers. And shock horror, it's not quite what they expected. And this is precisely what the empathize phase is about. The empathize phase is really about saying what the people really need. Let's not make up the assumptions about what they need, why they need it, or how they need it, but we really need to get close to the people that are going to be using the service or the product. And so that means active engagement, active connection, either observing, talking to. I mean, you can use surveys, but they're a risk because people might not say what they want to say, but you want to really observe them and see how would they or how are they using the current product or service? What would be better? So it's really about engaging with them and really looking for opportunities to say what's going on in their mind. What are they thinking? What are they feeling? What are they struggling with? And by doing this, we really understand the heart of the situation, and we start to remove our own assumptions about what do they need and why do they need it. And I think this is a big thing for me. We have to challenge our own assumptions about what the people need. Maybe we should send all politicians on a course of design thinking as well, but let's not go there as a conversation. There's lots of tools that we can bring to this, tons and tons and tons. And again, on the resource I'll share at the back end of the session, there's a lot of things we can look at, but mapping out all the stakeholders, they're all going to have different needs, interviews, watching, focus groups, getting people to journal how they use a product or a service and how they interact with it. Fantastic. Mapping out their experience. How do they use? Going to a great example would be going to Disney. What's a day in the life of a Disney user? And that's going to be different for different segments and different people that go and use a product or a service. We can also put multiple people together to go and explore and empathize. And then we can come up with some generic standards of people, profiles of who we think we're trying to serve as we come up with our prototypes and our designs of products and services. So empathy mapping or personas, which is the psychological profile of who we're trying to reach to. And these are just a few of the many, many tools that we could be using. I always start as a process with thinking about the stakeholder. The tendency is to be too narrow, and we get too focused on one or two critical people, often the louder people, the more extroverted groups of people. So really think about who are all the stakeholders, who's directly involved in this, and then think about what is it that's in common with these people and what are some of the issues that they're facing, and then go and do deeper exploration. But I would suggest in empathize, first of all, figure out who are all the people that engage with your service or product. There's probably more people than you think. And again, if you as a designer get people to help you, that's even better. Again, to your point in the chat box, Jill, people outside of your normal sphere of influence have probably got a better idea, kids being one of them, potentially. Empathy mapping has become one of the real big areas of certainly trying to understand people. So the empathy map is basically saying, we've now gone and done research, we've now gone and observed people. Let's think about the core of the person or the people that we're trying to understand. If we think about the generic person using a health service, a transport service, an ATM, a cash machine, bank machine, what's going on for them? And if we can create subsets or segments, we can think about what's really important to them. What are they looking at? What are they using to research and make their decisions? Who do they listen to when they're using a product or a service? How do they use or interact with our product or service? Or what really annoys or frustrates them about what they're doing? And what are they trying to achieve as a person or interacting with our product or service? But also, what stops them? And so we can use a visual map, like an empathy map, and map out this and get a better understanding before we even start to think about what's the problem. But let's get an understanding of who we're actually talking about, who are we thinking about, what's really going on in their world. And again, if you've got doing this collaboratively, you're going to get a better range of ideas and a better clarity of quality of thinking. This then often ends up with going into personas, and you can pull all of this information together and create kind of standardization. So here's a couple of examples. I know that it might be quite small on the screen. Again, you've got the slides afterwards, but these are from different roles within different organizations and what they're looking for. So it's trying to throw in this session a couple of different types of people into the same places. So this one that I'm underlying now, the bottom left-hand one, the blue, was for a CFO of an organization. And also the red one here was for the COO of the organization. Over here on the right-hand side, we were looking at particularly HR and sales as organizations, but trying to get this understanding of what's going on in the mind. And from this, we can start to create personas. And a persona is a profile of a specific group of people, your average person that uses your service or a specific subsegment. And it's fictional, there isn't a real person. And you're just trying to map out on a page or on a poster what their needs are, what their hopes are, what their dreams are, what they're wanting from your product or your service. And the idea is get into their heads, really deeply understand them. And ideally, if you can get feedback, then great, because this then lets you really focus on who are we truly serving here. And once we only know who we're truly serving, or what are they truly struggling with, or what are they hoping for, that's when we can start to define what do we do for them. So critical in my mind to design thinking is really understanding who is the user, what's their challenge or what's their opportunity, deep dive before we even think about what's the core of the problem that we're facing. As we go through this, if you've got questions, again, do throw them into the chat box. I am keeping an eye on that, but top of the screen, on top of the slide, so feel free to ask away as we go through this. Here are some examples I stole from the internet around the personas. You can see on here multiple different things, but there's always a random fictitious name, what they do, what motivates them, what they're interested in, and a bit of backstory, which is always fictional. And it's pretty much always the same in terms of what these things are designed and developed like. But by doing this, you get this clarity about who are we serving, what are they facing, what is it like? Let's put ourselves in the shoes of this person. This is the absolute critical element. In fact, I was working recently doing some executive coaching with an organization, and rather than think about a persona, they decided as a group to put a chair in each of their boardrooms, and it just had the customer on it. And every time they made a decision as a company, they now look to the chair and go, okay, if our customer was here, what would they say? So it's just trying to bring the customer or the user centric to the decision making. Into step two. So we've figured out who are we talking about, what are they living, what are they struggling with, what are they trying to achieve, what are their hopes and dreams, and then we come to, so what's the core of the problem that we're trying to solve? The tendency in business is to rush to this. In fact, the tendency to rush to the solution itself, but we don't need to do that. We should first about thinking about what's the core of the problem we're trying to serve. And we need to challenge ourselves around what the actual problem is as well. We often tend to things that we know or we already imagine. And I love this quote from Henry Ford. I think it's very apt for design thinking. You know, faster horses, that's going to be really useful. Not. So it's all about defining what's the core or the crux of the problem. And so what we're trying to do here is really understand what is the critical goal of the design project we're looking to achieve. Because we've already figured out their wants and their needs and pain points from the previous empathize phase. And we're trying to create a clear description of what the problem is. Interestingly with this, not too tight, otherwise that constrains our thinking, not too broad, otherwise we're really going to struggle we'll come up with all ideas for all people. So it's got to be a reasonable level of depth. And I think that's a critical piece to this. So frame it in a way that is helping you come up with solutions and ideas and ways of resolving this. It's always about the user, always, and it's always about their perspective. And again, keep it broad enough that you can be creative, but not too broad that you're trying to solve too many things at any given time. And ideally, if you do this well, you can also share this with other people who are involved. That helps them come up with ideas or give you feedback and thoughts as well as part of the process. So hopefully, having a well-scoped and articulated point of view of what the challenge is or what the opportunity is helps you manage the creative process that comes up afterwards. If I think about good problem statements, it helps us focus. Also, if we have a good statement, it should really inspire us and also let us know afterwards, hold on, what's better with this idea versus that idea? And so it helps us to evaluate. And also, if we've got clarity about what we're trying to solve, we can send people off to do their own thinking and then come back. And hopefully it also inspires everybody involved in this also. If it's too broad, it's impossible. If it's too narrow, it's also impossible. So it's a bit like Goldilocks, the fable of the girl and the three bears. It's just got to be just right. A problem statement that's just the right depth to enable problem solving or working through the problem itself. A few ways that might help this. 5 whys, so kind of this root cause analysis, is a great way of getting into what it's about. 4 Ws, the who, the what, the where, and the why. And probably my favorite is this filling in the gap. So who's the user, what are they trying to do, and what will they get if they get this done right? Or who is the, what are they looking for, what will they get, and why do they want this? Or who is the user, what are they trying to do, and what's the value to them? So this filling in the gaps is a great way of getting the feedback, but we're really looking to say, what are they trying to achieve? What's the problem? What's the issue? And only once we've got the issue clarified can we move forward. How might we is the typical phrase I use. How might we do X? How might we help them do Y? Here's a simple template I use often as I'm working in workshops on this. I get people, first of all, just to think about what's really going on. So what are we trying to achieve? Why are we trying to achieve this? And then what's the kind of one-line summary of the design challenge we're facing? So it's a simple template for focusing down on the problem itself. But and the great thing about this for me is, as we try and clarify what the problem is, if everybody co-creates this together, we get alignment about what we're trying to solve. It just saves so much trouble afterwards because everybody is aligned to the same problem, and we're not coming up with random ideas, and we're not having friction, and we're not having conflict about what's going on. So that was defined. And now this is where we get into ideate, and this is what people think about from design thinking. And actually, for me, it's probably the least important phase. The critical phases for me are the front 2. Most people, even if they're not particularly creative, can do the ideation piece. But the critical things for me are the empathize and the define, because this is what makes the difference with design thinking. If we just do ideate, prototype, and test, we're just in normal business problem solving or social problem solving. And the thing that really makes the difference is the front end here. And it might be actually, as we go into ideate, again, because it's iterative, we come up with some ideas and we go back and say, hold on, does this really match? Hold on, let's go and get some feedback here and go back to our users or stakeholders and see what they think. So again, it's not the linear fashion it's mapped out to be, but it is definitely more this iterative process. Creativity techniques, there's hundreds and hundreds and dozens. They're all valid within the design thinking world. I mean, design thinking is just an overlaying structure. You can bring all of the tools and techniques that you know already from all of the things that you've done in the past or courses that you've been on. If you've got a range of creative tools already, then great, use those. Just beware in ideation. Often it's dominated by the extroverts. And so the introverts like myself often struggle. How can you help with this? First of all, let people know before they're turning up for a session what they're going to be doing. Give them the design brief, the critical question up front. Give them a few days to think about it. Give them any documentation or research ahead of time also, so they can think about it and come with clear ideas. And when you run the session, if you're doing a workshop where you're getting people to come up with their ideas, classic brainstorming is possibly the worst technique that you can use. Brainstorming, post-it notes and so on, yes, but give people time to think. So brainstorming, in my mind, is this is the topic, here are your post-it notes, virtual or otherwise. Go off for 15 minutes and think about it in silence, then come back and share your ideas, and then let's do another iterative round again with some silence. So build silence into your sessions, build in preparation into your sessions, so that ideation fits for the extroverts and also for the introverts. So I haven't in this section put in tools and techniques for this. I'm really just talking about principles. What you're trying to do is to come up with lots of great ideas. It's not about here deciding which ones are great or not so great. It's really about deferring that judgment and saying, let's come up with lots of great ideas. And you can do this in lots of ways. It doesn't have to be everybody in a room. In fact, some of the research around the best creative processes is when it's done asynchronously. So over a week, get everybody to use a Miro board or the Mural board or whatever online board that you use, put their ideas there. But it's really about allowing people to find their space to come up with their ideas. And typically what really works from a facilitation perspective is multiple rounds, because then we get energized and engaged by the people around us and what they are seeing, and that spurs us to new ideas as well. So ideate through rounds as much as possible, and try and become conscious and unconscious. A lot of the business world is all about speaking in the moment. A lot of ideas, the best ideas probably come when we're not even thinking about them. And so give space for people to think and to reflect. In Spanish, one of my favorite phrases is, voy a consultarlo con la almohada. I'm going to consult this with my pillow, so I'm going to sleep on it. That's when I have my most creative moments. So give the space to the ideation. Don't think that a 30-minute workshop will be enough. It probably won't be. As I think about ideation, I really think it's completely critical to encourage it. A lot of people think they're not creative, but you can do it. There's lots of techniques that you can use to get people to be a bit more creative in their approaches. So, hey, pick up a dictionary, point to a word. What does that make you think? Bring some objects into the workshop. Go out for a walk in a park. Look at ways of creating random input into your session. Again, going back to the point Jill made earlier, the kids are brilliant at this because they're creative. Get back into your own creative kids' minds. And one of the best ways is getting out of the office. If you still go to one of those, go somewhere else, go to some fun environment. The best workshop I've done for design thinking ever was in the Barcelona Sea Museum, surrounded by boats and ships and anchors and all sorts of sea creatures. And it was just phenomenal. We had an amazing afternoon. We had dinner there afterwards. But because we're in this kind of different space, it just allowed people to be incredibly creative. So think about how you can create an environment that allows people to come back to their childlike way of being. Also, challenge yourself about what you're looking at. So close to me here, I've got an iron. If an iron, like an ironing iron, was an object, would it be happy? Would it be sad? If it had legs and feet, what would it say? What would it do? So get creative, force the creativity. But again, classical brainstorming, great, but really iterate the rounds. And then as I think about this, get out, go and just walk around the forest. And one of the critical things is taking notes. When I started my BSc in design and innovation, the first thing we were sent, apart from all the course materials, was a notebook. And if you look at designers, they generally have notebooks and they carry their notebooks with them all the time. In fact, my wallet has a little notebook in it. I've always got a notebook with me, not quite 24 hours a day, but most of the time, to be able to make a note of things or jot things down. It's also great for drawing, actually, when I'm waiting for the bus or the train or the aeroplane as well. But think about how you can encourage yourself and others to be creative. It doesn't have to be in the moment. It doesn't have to be in the meeting. So we're coming towards the end of the process. We've come up with lots of ideas. We're going to have to select some of these ideas, and prototyping is about coming up with simple models, mock-ups of this. Now, most people, when they think of prototyping, they think of, I don't know, toilet tubes and toothpick boxes and 3D models. Actually, you can prototype services very easily. So walking through the life of a customer, how they use the service throughout a day, or interaction, in my case, so recently I had to get a bus. So what was it like going through the whole process of using the bus service? Kind of map it out and think about how can it be better or streamlined or improved, or an app as well. So prototyping is about coming up with samples of the solution, but not so fully formed that it's cost you a fortune and taken forever to come up with this. And the whole goal here is really to get feedback from people. And this is an absolute critical piece, in my mind, of the design thinking approach. The prototyping is about experimentation, trying things out and having a go. Here on the left, you'll see the two founders of IDEO, which is probably the biggest design consultancy on the planet, and have force-fed design thinking into thousands of companies around the globe. And then over here on the right, Mr. James Dyson. I mean, an amazing inventor, and I really this is one of my favorite quotes. So, it's all about the failures and just trying it out and then seeing what happens. And, hey, fail enough and maybe you can become a multi-millionaire as well, possibly. So it's all about having a go, seeing, and it's about experimenting and trying. So a prototype is just a simple model, really, of what you're trying to achieve, just to see the basic foundational functioning of what you're trying. And again, it doesn't have to be a product, it can be a service. But just for fun, just curious to get your interaction, because you've all been pretty quiet, put into the chat box what you think these products are over here. These are all prototypes from different organizations. What was A? What was B? What was C? And what was D? Just throw your ideas or thoughts into the chat box for me. A couple I think you will definitely get. I'm not so sure about getting all four, but have a go. Just put into the chat box. Yeah, Pedro, A is Apple computer. Absolutely, yeah. The first Apple computer ever, which is not quite as slick as the MacBook Air I'm playing with today. But yeah, the first Apple computer. Absolutely. So D, so Kavita, the phone. B is a telephone, but it was the shift to the touch phone that we had. First touch phones. Christina, yeah, D, you've got that correct. That's the Nintendo Switch, before the Nintendo Switch became a Nintendo Switch. So it's stolen the handset of the Wii, and then it's added on a really appalling screen onto it as well. So it's a Nintendo Switch. So this is the Mac. This is a touch phone, first touch phones, as opposed to rotary phones, which is what they were when I was a young person back in the last century. I'm not seeing any C's here. C, Nintendo, no, definitely not Nintendo. This is the one that people always struggle with. There's a little thing on here that might give you a little indication of where it's coming from. Any thoughts on there, if you can see that? Yeah, so Christine, this is actually a prototype for an iPhone. This is an iPhone prototype. So if you think about it, it's got a phone on it and it's got a touch screen. So this is one of the models. This is quite a high fidelity prototype because it's pretty well made. So this is an early prototype, and I guess this is when message was still around of an iPhone. This is one of the original ideas. So you can see, yeah, it's interesting. You can see this pretty much how it's starting to come together. So prototypes can be very simple. The D example here is pretty simple. This one here, the C, is pretty complex already. So you can see prototyping can be a range of things. And I think prototyping is two levels. It's kind of low fidelity and high fidelity. But what you're trying to do really with prototype is you're still in experimentation phase because your prototypes aren't the final deal. So you're still trying to just try things out. And by getting people to interact, you're still learning and understanding and seeing how people use things. And actually, by getting people to play with an early version, you might get inspiration for improving and enhancing what you've provided. So by getting it out of your head or out of your team's head and into the head of the people that are going to use this, they might have a completely different idea of why or what they need from you. And so prototyping, think about it as two levels. I mean, first of all, low fidelity is a really easy thing. I really love this picture here on the right-hand side of an app. Just a piece of paper, cardboard, Post-it notes. You click something, you move the Post-it note around. Brilliant. Over here on the bottom left, you've got a simple storyboard of something being used. How would this work? Get feedback on it. This looks like a rip-off of a Dyson Hoover. Oh, Hoover, not even that, I said Dyson Hoover. Also here, it looks like a 3D engine done with 3D printing. And I think this is one of the big things now, actually. There's a lot of tooling and things like Figma, which is an online tool for coming up with mock-ups or for user design. 3D printing, there's lots of technologies to help you prototype. And you can do it, you can literally do it with cardboard boxes, but you can get quite advanced even on the very simple level of 3D printing. And 3D printing as a service exists. So you can always take your idea, get them to mock up the file and then print it off, and then you can share it. And again, get feedback. But the idea of the low fidelity is taking the thinking and being very, very basic with what you're looking at. Take it to the next level, higher fidelity. You're getting closer to the end product. So the simple web app is no longer pen and paper. It's getting almost to the end of what the process would look like. I've put down here also a service design. So it doesn't have to be a tangible product. You can map out a service and say, this is the service we're planning to roll out. Customers, users, public, what do you think of it? What's missing? What can we do? You can see here in the middle picture on the bottom of the slide how the original idea has gone from low fidelity to mid fidelity to the end product, whatever that product is, I have no idea. And then the final one here on the right hand side, an almost ready to go car, which actually has been camouflaged so that people don't know what the final model looks like. So prototyping is about coming up with beyond the ideas and just trying them out and getting feedback from the users. By working with the people that are going to use this, they're really going to give you good feedback and help you enhance or improve what you're working on. Jill, fantastic. Good to see this in the chat box. Not sure if you want to open your microphone and speak for a moment or not, let me know.
Sure,
that's a great example.
To. It feels like a fit for what we're talking about, and it's a visual. So conceptually, people have a hard time understanding, myself included, what palliative care is and hospice care. And so I created a visual that was essentially a Venn diagram that had areas of commonality, areas of difference, and we put it out there on the hospital website to all the palliative care units within this hospital system. And we've gotten feedback, and today we're going to make a new iteration of it based on the feedback. It's super exciting.
Cool, fantastic. Yeah, and I think that's the critical thing, right? Is go with it, share it, see what they say, and they'll give you the feedback. And if they love it, great. And if they don't love it, also great. So it's a really fantastic opportunity in that sense, I think. So let's jump into the final phase, and then I'll do a bit of a pause at the back end of this. I've got a couple of extra things to share as well if we're good for time, which I think we are so far. But the final phase is test. And this is really interesting because I really struggle personally still, even after, I don't know, 20 years or so of working with this, of the distinction. In my mind, prototype is the low fidelity and reasonably high fidelity. Coming into the final phase is about getting to something that's pretty close or is the final product. And you're getting feedback on the final product or the final service itself. A couple of quotes that I thought would go in here as well. Sir Ken Robinson, particularly in his world of education, is you've got to be prepared to be wrong, otherwise you'll never be right. It's an absolutely critical thing. And I kind of like Isaac Asimov, the fiction writer, because we often think that creativity is about this eureka moment. And actually it's not. It's like, hold on, I wasn't expecting that. So the example I always think of is the invention of rubber that we use on tires. That was they spent absolute years trying to come up with a compound that would help create tires for cars, and it was just one day they had a whole set of liquid next to a frying pan, and it fell over, and when it fell over into the frying pan, it became rubber, and they went, oh, that's funny, and that's how car rubber for wheels was invented. And if you look at a lot of the inventions out there, it wasn't like someone saying, I want to invent this. A lot of these things come because of conversations or because of serendipity. What we're trying to do with test is really make sure that what we've come up with is really going to work, really be of value beyond the prototype. And if I think about this, it's really making sure that you're coming up with a really good idea and that you don't get, like in Mara's cartoon here, inundated with really not so great feedback. Hopefully, if you test well, you're saving time, you're saving money, you're getting the satisfaction. But also, again, test is not the end. You might go all the way back and say, hold on, the world has changed. I mean, look at how fast the world changes these days. You come up with an amazing product, it might be out of sync with what people need within 6 months. And so what you're trying to do is to get three things aligned, hopefully. What people want, what you can actually create, whether it's a product or a service, but also if you're a for-profit organization, something that's viable. I mean, even if you're not a for-profit organization, you still need to be able to deliver the service in a cost-effective way. So even if you're not a for-profit business, it still has to be viable. Can you deliver the service or support you're looking to give? And if you look at business failure, pretty much any business, it's probably because one of these elements is missing, and you really need all three to be successful. The example I always share with this is an amazing product from my youth. Okay, shows how old I am. So Sir Clive Sinclair was basically in the UK the inventor of the home computer, kind of at the time of Amstrad in the US and Commodores, and he came up with this amazing device. Hey, look, battery-assisted cycling. We're just about getting around now to battery-assisted cycling again. But he was trying to get cars off the road. It was actually pretty well priced for the time. I mean, even a normal mountain bike costs more than that these days, certainly where I live in the world. It was pretty fast to get places, and he made a ton of units, but people hated it, and they hated it with a vengeance. So he only sold 5,000, and he made a complete loss. Why was this? Very simply, because he didn't have the three circles of the Venn diagram together. The idea was great, but it was ahead of its time. He basically created this thing because he was an inventor and he'd been like a multimillionaire from his home computer. He basically designed this on his own in his laboratory, and then did a big press rollout in the UK in London, and kind of got like 1,000 people from the press and went ta-da, and they went, oh, we don't like this, and they hated it. And it's really logical if you look at it. This is the 80s. The car is on the roads. I mean, first of all, this is on the road, so you're stuck behind a car. Who wants to be behind a car getting all the exhaust fumes that's coming out of the vehicle in front of you? What a complete nightmare. And then the car behind it doesn't see you. Smash. You become a sandwich between two cars. So it was completely inappropriate for the time. It might work now, or in some countries and cultures it might be appropriate, but at the time it was a complete failure. So it was an interesting idea, but it didn't really fit the three circles. It was feasible technology-wise. In fact, it was ahead of its time. That was probably the problem. It wasn't desired, and because it wasn't desired, he couldn't make the numbers work. And so the Sinclair C5 became a complete failure. I mean, that's a lot of money to lose. And this is 1985 pounds. So probably, I don't know, today, that would probably be $25, $30 million. It's a pretty big failure. And all because he didn't do a process that went and spoke to people who would use this. As simple as that. And that's what the test is really about. So as you think about testing, you want to get as many people involved as possible, and you want to give them choices. So a bit like with prototyping, you want to try and give different people options or different variations of what you've produced. You don't want to present it. That would be deadly dull. You want to get them to play and explore and have a go with it. And as they're doing this, get them to talk through their experience, narrate what they're thinking, narrate what they're feeling, narrate what they're doing with this product or service that they're looking at. And as a facilitator, I'm always in observation mode here. What are they doing? It's so curious that, I mean, the example for me is when people go into a car showroom and have a look at a car, what the people think who sell the cars versus what I would do is completely different often. It's a very different thing. I'm looking at different elements of the car versus the people that are trying to sell it. So observe, get curious. How are they using? What are they using for? Are they using it for something else? And then get feedback, and again, iterate this process. Really get people to have a play and have a go with it. So you want to get as many people playing out with different versions and trying different things. As you do this, think about looking at different ways of getting the feedback. So it could be just a demo session. It could be just giving people a service or a product and say, go away and use it, come back to us. But look at different ways to get the feedback. Try again to come up with multiple prototypes of what's going on. Ideally, think about different people, different stakeholders. Right at the front end, I talk about the stakeholder groups. If you get the normal users versus the extreme people. And again, if it's going global or even across a region, try with different people, because culturally people might use things in very different ways. I'm from Wales, and North Walians are very different from South Walians, and would probably use the product or service in a completely different way. So think about who you're going to get to use it, and prep these sessions. So think about what questions you're going to ask, which are the critical questions versus the non-essential questions to engage and ask people. And this is about understanding. Don't get defensive about what you've created, even though you love it and it's dear to your heart, but just be really curious and don't defend yourselves. Just say, hey, that's interesting. A bit like feedback. When you get feedback from people, I always say to people, just say, thank you, and then think about whether you want to take it or not afterwards. Similar with testing phase of design thinking. And then if possible, if you can adapt it there and then say, oh, that's an interesting idea, let's just change it, the configuration or the process flow. Have a go at that if possible. That's always something to consider. And let the people who are testing give you feedback. I mean, no product or service is ever finished. I mean, look at today. Every time I go on an aeroplane, every time there's a public toilet, I'm being asked for feedback on how the service was. Well, not the public toilet, just the airplane. But we're always being asked for feedback because that feedback goes back to generating the next version of flying, using a bus, using whatever. So allow people to contribute, not just when you're testing, but all the way through into the future as well. A few ways that I think about this. And I'm just going to check the chat box. I see another comments come in. Okay, I see there's a dropout. Fantastic. Or not fantastic, but hey, we'll allow it. A few ways that I kind of like to do this. Having given people an experience or played around with a product or a service, getting them back afterwards and just asking them, fill in the missing dots here. I wish about this product or service, what I liked about this product or service. What if product or service did the following? And so that's a great way of very simply doing a feedback round to get ideas. Also on a whiteboard, face-to-face or virtual, what were the likes? What were the criticisms? What were the ideas, or what were the follow-up questions? So getting the users of the test phase to put up on boards, whiteboards, virtual or not, what they thought. And then the final way that I like to get feedback from test is from my own observation or observation of other people that I'm involved with. Share the stories of how we saw people using the product or the service and what struck us about the way that they used and interacted with the product or the service. And again, the more of this, the better. The more people you speak to, the better, and so on. So what I really hope through what we've discussed here is you can see there's quite a lot of moving elements, but at its heart, design thinking is actually pretty simple. It's customer user-centric problem solving, and it starts with them. And that's where it goes to. It's really about understanding them and their view and their perspective. Understand first, then figure out what the actual problem is, because your initial idea might be completely wrong. And then from that defined problem statement, come up with ideas, come up with some simple models, storyboards, mock-ups, get feedback on those. Come up with something more concrete, more specific, a finished design or an almost finished design, get more feedback, and then go into production mode with your product or your service. So I'm just curious. I've seen questions coming in. Ruta, so your question here about how to look at testing first-time testers versus users that have already tested earlier. I think you need to look at both, and there's probably something in between. So look. All feedback is useful feedback. You just have to discern what's going to give you most value, and get curious about what the different levels of experience users give you in terms of the feedback. That will also connect into the segmentation that you have around who are your more valuable users or customers as well. But I definitely think getting all of it is particularly useful. And in my mind, first-time users or first-time users are really valuable because they don't have that. They're not already negatively viewing your product or your service. So they come in with fresh eyes, kids' eyes, and that's particularly useful. You know, if I think about the work that I've done in the IT space, where people have come in, you know, they've used the product, or if you say to me, example, 20 years of using Microsoft Windows, I mean, I would give you pretty hard feedback on Microsoft Windows. In fact, it was so grim, I moved over to using Mac software. So beware of experienced users, because sometimes there might be a bit negative about it. Also think about who you get there. Kavita says, how should we convince an organization to engage in design thinking? I would, in this space, Kavita, I would say better to ask for forgiveness than to ask for permission. You don't have to go around saying, hey, we're doing design thinking. You just say, hey, let's go and speak to some human beings about what they think about our product or our service, whether that's internal or external. And then, with 3 or 4 of your friends, you kind of do this in a secret spy-like way. go out there, speak to people, observe people, then come together over coffee or something even more alcoholic if that's appropriate, and then figure out what's the real problem, and then go off and do some ideation, meet up a week after, then come up with some simple prototypes. So I don't think you always have to do it as a formal process, but what you can do, once you've come up with your final ideas and tests, you can then say, we've come up with this is the process we used, it's called design thinking, we should do more of it. So I would probably use it in stealth mode first, and then from that, go out and explore using it. Jeanette, you get hired to do service design. I always get pushback from this. Yeah, I think, well, so it's interesting. So I think there's a couple of things here. One is the pushback often is not necessarily you. I doubt it's ever you. It's more the fact that it's an external resource coming in to help them with something that they could already do. Like I know working with, I worked at the UK university for 11 years, and it used to really annoy and upset me when we would bring in the consultants to do things that we were already skilled and qualified for. We're a business school. We don't need change consultants around here. And I think it's often the same with design. The people who are closest to the product or the service, they already know how to do it. And so I think I kind of my way of doing this is almost to kind of come in and say, I'm just a thinking partner. And again, I'm not coming to do design thinking at you. I'm coming in to design thinking with you. And my goal as a facilitator is always to hand over the tools and the techniques. I mean, ideally, after one or two interactions, it's handed over. And so that's my kind of approach, really. So I kind of come in from a very partnership approach, a humble approach. So I would really go and look at the work by Ed Schein, the work by Peter Block, would be the two people I'd go and explore their work, because they're all about humble consulting and partner-driven consulting. So those would be the two people that I'd go and have a look at their work. So Ed Schein, humble consulting, and Peter Block, flawless consulting. Peter's a mentor of mine, he's a real great guy. And they've both come with this kind of 50-50 approach to consulting. And Peter actually talks about this in his work. He says, often we come in as the experts, and that just puts pressure on us and doesn't allow us to do our best work. The opposite end is we come in as a pair of hands and we just do what we're told. That's no great either. The best consulting relationship is when we're 50-50 and we're equal partners. And so the question is, how do you shift back to 50-50? So just checking the questions again, also checking the time. I think that connected with that. Okay, what are some simple design thinking ideas that you could introduce to this? I mean, so I think in my mind, in terms of what are some simple design thinking ideas, just look at things around you at work and say, what do you dislike, or what annoys you, or what gets on your nerves? That's a great place to start doing some design thinking processes. Or internally in an organization, go and speak to your colleagues. What doesn't work well around here, or what could work better? And then do some internal design. Again, off the radar, just do it internally and work with people as well. Uta, question here on how do we integrate design thinking with Agile and Scrum? I think the two really go well together, because the Agile process, the ceremonies that you use fit really well, and the sprint process that you have in Agile and Scrum fits really well. So I could imagine, I work a lot with software companies, and they have sprints of 2 weeks, and you could effectively say every 2 weeks, as well as the day job, let's put on a side project where the design thinking process happens over a series of 5 sprints. So you could do a 5-sprint process, and you could bring in an element of design thinking into each of the sections. So that's probably what I would say with that. I think the two things go really well together. And again, don't get stuck in this mystification of what design thinking is. It's just a problem-solving process. It's just a way of structuring a load of tools and techniques that you already use. Similarly, Jill, yeah, appreciative inquiry. I mean, I think that's a great way of looking at things. So if we're looking at dreaming and discovering and co-creating a future, that methodology also fits in very well with design thinking. So I think that's a real good idea as well. With the last few minutes, I think I've got 2 slides that I really want to share with you before we head off into our evenings, mornings, afternoons, wherever you might be on the planet. The first one is, and I hope it's here. Yeah, I mean, how do you bring Drawify into this? I mean, Drawify itself is really a simple, with the newest version, is a platform with lots of visuals, hand-drawn, where you can change the colors, change the sizes, add them all together, upload your own ideas and things into them, and create templates and documents. And so, in my mind, we can use Drawify in a range of ways, and I've just put a few here. So onboarding materials, invitations to a design thinking process or to a workshop, forms and templates for people to use as they go out and do engaging with stakeholders, posters that inspire people to come along to the sessions, or even presentations about what you found. And then if you've come up with a new product or service, I mean, definitely in my mind, the marketing collateral, the new version of the Drawify platform particularly, has already got pre-sized Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, TikTok, you name it, structures as well, all ready to kind of help you with the marketing. And again, in Miro particularly, if you've got an account with Drawify and you can connect it to your Miro, so you can use that for creating service design flows and so on as well. So I think that's another way I would consider. And so I think this would be a way to really consider this. And the last thing I think I wanted to share is if you want to go a bit deeper, I put together a link of resources. So on here, there's, I think, about 15 websites around design thinking, my top 10 book recommendations, doc PDFs around the topic, videos from a range of places, and also communities as well. So if you want to go and explore more, go and have a look. But hopefully today has been, in less than 60 minutes, I think we're 57, a rapid view of design thinking in a nutshell, only to realize on Drawify we do not have a nutshell. I know there's lots of great squirrels because Ben has drawn lots of great squirrels, but I didn't find a nutshell. So my task this weekend is to go and draw a nutshell. And I think pretty much that's it from me today. So I'm going to stop the sharing. If anyone's got any more questions, then over to you all, really.
Wow, Andy, that was amazing. But I'll step back and let other people speak too. But I just wanted to acknowledge what a whirlwind tour of design thinking. It was wonderful.
Thanks, Jeanette. No pressure. It might take a few days to get out there, but I'll draw a nutshell. Probably won't be as good as anybody else's. But yeah, cool, fantastic. If any more questions, feel free to throw your questions in the chat box. I'm keeping an eye on that.
Yeah, lots of love in the chat.
Cool, fantastic. Thank you very much. Glad everyone turned up. Yeah, great numbers and some good questions as well, which is really, really good.
Mm-hmm.
I can also put the resource that I shared there, I'll put it into the chat box as well. I think if people want to go and just book note it more than anything else, that might be a useful thing for people to go and do as well. So if their version of this allows people to actually do anything with the chat box. I know some people have their versions of Zoom locked down, but if you want to go and have a look at design thinking tools, the link is in the chat box.
Yeah. Fantastic, Andy. We are just at the top of the hour. I can't thank you enough for all that you have done, shared with us right now, and all the resources that we have access to. And of course, everyone will have access to this recording and the slide deck, and that will happen within 24 hours for sure. So thank you so much for being with us. We look forward to seeing you again.
Cool. Thanks for having me, and thanks everyone for listening to me for an hour. That's very impressive. Have an amazing evening, afternoon, and day. Thanks a lot for your time.
Too funny.